Hi guys, Sam McBride, the Northern Ireland editor of the Belfast Telegraph, spoke to Kieran Dunbar on the newspaper's podcast about a future united Ireland. Sam, here in this clip that he posted to Twitter, speaks about the threat of Loyalist violence if such an event were to come about. Now, the journalist expresses his surprise with nationalists, not unionists, who accuse him of attempting to stoke trouble by raising this as an issue. He then asks a weird question. How would the Irish Defence Forces react to Loyalist violence? Have a listen.
The worst thing that could happen, if you're thinking about the darkest scenario for how Irish unity could come about, it's where there is a murderous loyalist backlash, where either there is some sort of very concerted campaign to try to stop what is happening in a quasi-military sense, a bit more like 1912, where guns were brought into Larne, etc., by the old UVF, or something like the more modern UVF, where it is simply about pure sectarian slaughter. It's about finding random Catholics, shooting them in the head. Either of those is clearly something that any rational person, any moral person wants to avoid if there is to be Irish unity. And yet, one of the things that struck me about this was that when I wrote about this, the biggest backlash didn't come from loyalists or unionists saying, how dare you suggest that we might be violent? Obviously, most unionists, most loyalists probably wouldn't be violent. There's no reason to believe that. But the real backlash came from Irish Republicans, from some nationalists who said, this is so irresponsible. How dare you suggest that there would be loyalist violence in the event of Irish unity? That's something which you're almost encouraging. You're almost salivating over this. And I was quite taken aback by that, because I think what it shows is that we are still in the foothills of these debates about Irish unity. We haven't really got serious about it. Even those who say that this is central to their politics, they're actually just dabbling their toe in the water. And so what you have at present is that if that was to happen, let's say in 10 years' time, there might be a vote for Irish unity. If that was to happen, what would the Irish Defence Forces do?
Now, it's a weird question because, well, what would the Irish Defence Forces do? It wouldn't be up to the job of the Irish Defence Forces. It would be a police issue. Like what's happening in Northern Ireland at the minute, this is a police issue. It's the RUC at one stage, and now it's the Police Service of Northern Ireland that deal with this. It's not the British Army. That happened in the 1970s, and it was a disaster. So this would be a policing issue. But let's get back to the main point here. And to a certain extent, I understand what he's saying here, that, unionists are saying, how dare you say that we would do this? Many unionists, of course, would not support actions like this. But the idea that nationalists and Republicans are saying you're stoking this, I don't believe for a second that Sam McBride supports any kind of violence at all. Okay, that's just idiotic to suggest such a thing. But what I think the problem here is that there's an attempt to not talk about a united Ireland because it might upset unionists. It might undermine the unionist position. And that's why you're seeing many unionists avoid talking about a united Ireland, suggest that it's never going to happen. Now, it's more likely than not to happen. And it would be important for unionists to be on board, because it's important for them to be on board because it's their future country. But it's important to have them on board to speak to the people who would be likely to take up arms against the Irish state and try and stop a united Ireland, or try and undermine it in some way. I think the unionists, the moderates, have a responsibility to speak to the people on the extreme and explain to them there's nothing to worry about. Our identity will be protected. But the only way we can protect that identity is if we're fully on board at the very beginning. It's going to be difficult to protect that identity after. We should be right there at the beginning. But the unionists are afraid to say this because, of course, it puts them on a collision course with hardline unionists or loyalists who say, well, you're selling out. You're not willing to fight for the union. So this is a potentially dangerous scenario where unionists have abandoned their own communities in order to hold on to power now at the expense of the future. And this sense of betrayal will be filled by a violent vacuum. And this is what we want to avoid. It's difficult for the Irish government to reach out to loyalists. It's difficult for Sinn Féin or the SDLP or even the Alliance Party to reach out to loyalists. The only people who can do it are people within the community. The adults need to stand up and explain the situation. Journalists also need to stand up and explain the situation. Let me know in the comment section, guys, what you think about all of this. As always, your comments are greatly appreciated. Thanks a lot.